And my answer is not because I lost my mind, but it's because I found my art. When the 2020 election came up, and Donald Trump was lying, cheating, and stealing, tried to steal an election, and so was a cast of characters that knew that election wasn't rigged. It was within hours, I said, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing here and speak up, even if it costs me. In this moment in time, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing. It includes calling out a sitting president, even if your family gets death threats, even if your kids have a tough time, even if our friends won't really talk to us much anymore in our community. Look, we're not just called to be Christians.
Yeah.
That almost seems simple.
Yeah.
We're called to be Jesus followers.
Wow.
My faith is driving so much of this, and it couldn't square up. At the end of the day, if my works don't match my faith, then what good is it? The shelf life of picking fights has expired. It is time to start showing up to work and solving problems. I walked up to Stacey Abrams, who was the minority leader. We've raised over $500 million for 54 rural hospitals. You know, the question I get asked the most is, Geoff, why are you running for governor as a Democrat? And my answer is not because I lost my mind, but it's because I found my art. It's a faith journey. This is a change of heart, and I cannot wait to wake up as the governor of Georgia to meet 11 million Georgians in their toughest times.
Hello and welcome to another edition of No Amen Required. I'm E. Dewey Smith, and I'm so incredibly excited that you've tuned in. Please call a friend, call a relative, call a neighbor, and let them know that No Amen Required is on and we're live. If you're watching, consider liking, subscribing, and sending this link to somebody. Today's going to be an incredibly necessary conversation. It's going to be a real conversation, it's going to be a powerful conversation, and one that we need desperately. Desperate times require desperate measures, and today we have a conversation that I think is going to be a blessing to you, and of course it's been a blessing to me just to have this opportunity. I want to welcome you to No Amen Required and meet our guest for today. He has an incredible story. He's our former lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia, and he is a current gubernatorial candidate in the Democratic Party, and ironically is the first person that I've heard from who's running for the gubernatorial race. I'm excited that he's here today. I want to introduce you to Geoff Duncan, the former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm excited to be here too. Thanks for the opportunity.
You know, I've been following your story pretty closely the past 5 or 6 years, and one of the things that I was really impressed by is your love for sports. I was a former athlete as well, and I understand you're a baseball player. So tell us something about your upbringing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I lived in 7 states growing up. Most people don't know that. So every 2 years, my dad's job moved us, and so we literally did a lap around the country.
Wow.
Ended up in Georgia my senior year in high school. But sports was my way to meet friends. If I was good at sports, then I'd show up to a new city and have a bunch of friends and teammates. And so I became really good at baseball, and senior year in high school, I show up on a field, and Georgia Tech was there to scout another kid, and I threw a no-hitter with 17 strikeouts. And so I got a scholarship to Georgia Tech.
Wow.
And off I went, got to play 3 great years, and got drafted by the Marlins in 1996 to play professional baseball. And I didn't wait 2 seconds to sign that contract and went off to get my first job.
Man, that's amazing. So 30 years ago, you were drafted into the MLB.
Yeah, and now we've got 3 boys.
Wow.
They've played all the sports under the sun. I've coached their teams, football, baseball, golf, even tried a little basketball. Duncans aren't very good at basketball, but we seem to be good at the other sports.
I got you. And along the journey, I guess from 7 states to Georgia Tech to Lieutenant Governor, you met a lovely woman. Tell us about your family, your wife.
Met my wife my senior year in high school, right when I first moved down here to Alpharetta. And she was a trainer on the football team, and I was the quarterback on the football team. And we met, and the rest is history. Now, if she knew I was going to eventually get into politics, she probably would have done something different in high school than go to the prom with me. But here we are, and 28 years strong, married, and got 3 awesome kids.
Yes, she kept chasing you until you finally said yes.
That's right.
That's your part of the story.
It was so annoying. Her just chasing me down the hallways.
Goodness, I can only imagine, man.
Yeah, you probably went through the same problems.
the same story, man. 38 years, I just couldn't. Okay, all right, I'm here.
Just gave in?
Let's do it. Yes, that's what happened. So, and we've been stuck ever since. So I'm good. Good to see you. Good to know that story. And then from baseball, you transitioned into your profession, to the corporate world. You an entrepreneur. Talk a little bit about that.
So during the off seasons of baseball, my wife and I found a job to make some spare change, working for a promotional products company. And eventually, when my career ended with shoulder surgery, we started our first company out of our living room, just the two of us. I ran the outside operations, she ran the inside operations, and we quickly grew that business and eventually sold it. And then moved into some other entrepreneurial opportunities. But yeah, it's always kind of been a thing for me, being an entrepreneur. Just that tension of getting something started and coming up with a great idea and rolling the dice.
You know, it's funny. We were teasing about our wives and how you said that your wife would have never probably said yes if she'd known you'd be in politics. And my wife said the same thing because I was a minister. She wanted nothing to do with me. If I was a good deacon, maybe a choir member, or an usher, maybe yes. And so from athletics to being an entrepreneur, what happened that gave you a shift and a change? I mean, what lightning bolt came from heaven? What book fell out of a shelf, hit you on your head to get you to change from being an entrepreneur to politics in Georgia? How in the world did that happen?
So this is probably around 2010, and I never thought about politics, right? It wasn't on my bucket list.
Yeah.
I was just plugging along with life, coaching the kids' teams, going to work every day. But we showed up at church on a Sunday, and our pastor had a series called Recovery Road, and essentially was just, it challenged us to stop complaining and start getting involved. And really use Nehemiah as the centerpiece of that, and his story of, Nehemiah 6:3, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down.
Yeah.
He felt a passion to go do something and make a difference by rebuilding that wall. And that's the passion I felt. And, he kind of dropped a couple nuggets. He said, if you want to improve education, don't complain about teachers. Go volunteer in communities that kids need some extra tutoring, or pay your taxes on time, or just get involved, feed the hungry. Or maybe you should go run for office. And I walked out in the parking lot and I looked at my wife and I said, hey, let's go run for office. And she looked me right square in the eyes and said, well, I did not hear that in that message. But fast forward a few months and a year, and we ended up running for a state house seat. And we won, and I showed up the first day at the Capitol, complete novice as to how to pass a bill or whatnot, but I was principled. But the thing that caught me off guard was how hyper-partisan so many people in that room were.
Yeah.
And I realized my core was not hyper-partisan. I wasn't there to be a far right or a far left. I was there to just solve problems. Just show up and understand the problems like I would in the business world, and try to work with as many people as I could to find solutions.
Yes. I remember the first time I met you, I was invited to be the chaplain of the day at the State House. And we exchanged pleasantries, and you were kind. And so from that moment, I guess I just kind of lost touch and, was not following your journey. But after 2020, and I began to take notice of you, honestly, my wife asked, did I have any familiarity with you, because she had seen some of your statements. You were the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, and you took a very strong, risky stance against the tyranny and the imperialism that was taking place in the U.S. government, and I thought it was very bold. And you garnered my respect, not because of something that's partisan, but because I felt principled, and I felt you were a principled person. But it's come at a significant political risk and cost to you. What made you stand against what was happening with 45? I don't like to, Lord, keep my tongue, Jesus. What made you stand against President Trump and some of the activity and some of the divisive ideologies that were coming from being spewed from the White House? And what made you get to that point of transition, transformation? Yeah,
it started years before the 2020 election. It started when I showed up there at the State House and saw the value of working across the aisle and gathering consensus. I wrote a book one day at one time called, or it talks about the power of two, the power of three. And the power of two, and this is really faith-driven, is go find somebody on the other side of the issue, on the other side of the aisle, and just become good friends with them. Not because you're trying to change their mind, but because you want to gain their perspective.
Yes.
Mine was a gentleman by the name of Dewey McClain. I talk about him often. He was my seatmate. He was a former NFL football player and a lifelong Democrat. And I just learned so much from that time in gaining that perspective. And so I saw the value of working, but I also saw the value in just telling the truth. And so when the 2020 election came up, and Donald Trump was lying, cheating, and stealing, tried to steal an election, and so was a cast of characters that knew that election wasn't rigged. It was within hours, I said, I'm going to stand up and do the right thing here and speak up, even if it cost me.
Wow. Because
I didn't want the freight train to leave the station of these conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, they did. But we pushed back, we stayed strong, and I'm just not going to stop now. I mean, I just testified in the January 6th hearings again in Congress, and a lot of folks ask, why are you still talking about it? It's because we have to. We've got to tell history accurately so that we never repeat the nonsense that's going on right now in this country. And it did come at a huge political price, but our family motto, raising our three boys, is doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And in this moment in time, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing includes calling out a sitting president, even if your family gets death threats, even if your kids have a tough time, even if our friends won't really talk to us much anymore in our community.
Wow.
That's just the right thing to do, and God's got this. And I think just showing up every day, telling the truth, whether that means I get elected as governor, whether that means I don't get elected as governor, I still sleep really good at night.
If I can be honest with you, what really impressed me about you, knowing your faith journey and your faith affiliation, what really encouraged me was not just you being principled, but you could tell that was a faith-based foundation. And that is important because a lot of people, even who are on the other side, who are supporting the chicanery and the duplicity coming from the White House, many of them would boldly proclaim that they're faith-based. And it's a brand of Christianity that really makes not just, people who are faith-based look bad, but it makes younger people and all people skeptical. And, it's funny how people can communicate the name of my deity or Jesus Christ, but not necessarily demonstrate the nature of Jesus Christ. And so what has happened is, for me, you were able to separate your politics from your faith. What role has your faith played in politics, or even your separation from what was not favorable for the country? Has faith played a role in that?
Yeah, look, we're not just called to be Christians.
Yeah.
That almost seems simple.
Yeah.
We're called to be Jesus followers.
Wow.
And when you're a Jesus follower, you try to emulate the ways and his attitudes.
Yeah.
And the question I get asked the most about this transformation of being a former Republican to becoming a Democrat is, what's the catalyst? Everybody wants to know, what was that moment in time?
Yeah.
And it's my faith. My faith doesn't allow me to walk by that homeless person and try to make an excuse as to why it should be their fault. It doesn't want me to drive by that hospital parking lot and see those families sitting in their parking spots, deciding whether or not they go into the hospital and bankrupt themselves or just deal with their medical issues on their own.
Yeah.
Those folks deserve health insurance.
Yeah.
Driving by or walking by a television screen and seeing a mass shooting play out, and Republicans making excuses why they're not going to pass common sense gun legislation.
My goodness.
My faith is driving so much of this, and it couldn't square up. And so, at the risk of creating political harm, at the risk of not being in the cool kids club anymore, it's just the right thing to do.
Wow.
And that's what's led me on this journey and gives me the courage to stand up every day and to try to be that Jesus follower with my actions, not just with my words. I mean, I can get up and quote a bunch of Bible verses and do all that, this and that, but at the end of the day, if my works don't match my faith, then what good is it?
And that's amazing because, honestly, I think it's created, what Donald Trump has done is created such more of a divide in the faith-based community. It reminds me of what Gandhi said. I like your Christ, I just don't like these Christians. And so it's just the brand of theology. Nat Turner, who's a slave, worship with the slave masters. And I would ask myself, the slave masters were praying to their God, and Nat Turner was praying to his God. Which God was answering prayer? Were they praying to the same God? And for me, what I appreciate about you is your faith is not one for the furtherance and perpetuation of the empire and power and political process, but your faith informs your opinion to see all people equally and not one to foment the same oppression and subjugation of peoples. And that's what I appreciate about you, because it's principled. And unfortunately, the Republican Party as we knew it is no more. And so I just want to say that that's one of the things that I appreciate about you. And even now, we're still hearing about from these election deniers. What do you say to even now? I mean, now we have our ballots being taken in Fulton County. What is your response? What would you do if winning the gubernatorial race? How do you respond to that?
I think now more than ever, we need honest umpires in elected office, folks that are willing and able to walk in and put the real facts on the table, make the big decisions, communicate well, take input, and build consensus.
Yes.
But make no mistake about it, this FBI raid on these Fulton County election warehouse has nothing to do with the 2020 election.
Yes.
I think that's pretty easy for most folks to see. This has everything to do with sowing seeds of doubt in this 26 midterms. And it's a dangerous thing to do.
Yes.
Republicans and Democrats should all be standing up as loudly as they possibly can, pushing back on this narrative, because they're just usurping democracy.
Yes.
That's what this process is about. We ought to look for ways, and I've said this for years, we ought to look for ways to expand the opportunities for people to vote. Certainly, we want legal folks and all of those mechanisms in place, but we can get a man to the moon in 3 days. We can certainly figure out if somebody's able to vote. And we shouldn't be looking to constrict people, because those decisions are made in partisan corners. That makes no sense. That's not democracy. Democracy is, if you want to win the election, go do a better job than the next person. Go have a better plan. Go have a better vision.
Right. You know, I appreciate you saying that, because it kind of segues this conversation to, I guess, the elephant in the room. You know, I want to have a real conversation. And
I see what you did there, the elephant in the room.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, we need to get to some bazookas and shit. But anyway, Lord hold my tongue. But there was a lot of ambiguity and a lot of controversy with a race that you were connected to, I guess, your first time running for lieutenant governor. At the time, the Secretary of State was also pursuing the gubernatorial race. And it was very heightened in the African-American community, because Stacey Abrams, who I've known since our college days when she was at Spelman, and ran a good race, and we, were very, very engaged. But 300 voters were removed from the rolls.
300,000.
300,000,
right?
From the Secretary of State, who was also running for the gubernatorial seat. And so it created a lot of anxiety, and this whole conversation about voter suppression, this whole conversation about something being stolen, really didn't originate with Donald Trump. And unfortunately, you were not the Secretary of State at the time, but by you being on that party ticket, I think sometimes the aroma, also, lingered around you, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so what would you say to a person who still feels that election, not just what's happening now with Fulton County and with Donald Trump, but who still holds some sense of anxiety, or who may have issues with you just because it's guilt by association? And then in 2020, 2021, when Georgia passed some other laws about passing out waters to voters in the voting lines, or not passing out snacks, I think you presided over that. You didn't, you carried out the vote, but it was something that happened collectively. I want you to address that, because there are some people who may still feel, well, how are you any different from what Trump and his minions are doing? What makes you different? How can we trust you to ensure that what they did, that for purposes of political expediency, that you won't do the same? What would be your response to that?
Well, going back to 2018, obviously governor and lieutenant governor run in separate lanes in Georgia. Some states they run as a ticket, but we run in separate lanes.
Yes.
And I was not the Secretary of State. I was a backbenching state rep that never got allowed to chair anything because I voted no too often. So I worked as hard as I could to meet as many Georgians as I could in communities across the state.
So you were not on that ticket. It was a separate race, and it had nothing to do with you. You were not a duo.
That's exactly right. I read, like everybody else listening, about the rolls being cut in the newspaper. I was certainly not part of any of that. But I think that goes back to this narrative of look, if you really want to wake up and do the right thing about voting rights and access to voting, you ought to do it in bipartisan corners, right? We should never be making election day laws in silos, right? We should be doing it as a whole. And even these attempts by Donald Trump to talk about, and other Republicans to talk about eliminating early voting and absentee ballots and things of that nature. I mean, it's just ridiculous. What if you're a single parent nurse working 24-hour shifts or something like that on election day, or you're a business person having to travel out of town for a once-in-a-lifetime sales opportunity, or all the things between those gaps? We shouldn't make voting harder. We should make it simpler. We should make more access to it first and foremost. With regards to the post-2020 election fallout at the Georgia State Capitol, I saw the tsunami coming. Obviously, I was speaking out as loudly as anybody. I was going to national television shows multiple times a day, writing op-eds, doing every interview I could possibly do to push back on Donald Trump and this disgusting attempt by Republicans to write this manifesto of election laws that were just basically fanning the flames of conspiracy theories, which
Indeed.
is all it was. So when the first bill came up on the Senate floor, which was January of 2021, as Lieutenant Governor, I serve as the President of the Senate.
Right.
So I oversee. I don't get a yes or no button. I just oversee the process, and I literally didn't know what to do to lob a protest. So I put the Senate in recess, and I walked out of the room.
Wow.
And they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know, but y'all are going to have to figure this out."
Wow.
So I created, some chaos amongst them to slow it down and to bring a heightened alert to the rest of Georgia to see. And it actually became a national story that Georgia was not doing the right thing. We were carrying Donald Trump's fake manifesto of all the lies and the conspiracy theories that he was talking about the 2020 election. Fast forward a few weeks, the SB 202 came back up there for a vote. They had changed it and morphed it in ways, but I took to the airwaves that day. I took to the airwaves for weeks and months afterwards, talking about, how cruel and unusual punishment is it to somebody if it's a hot day or a cold day and you can't bring them a cold glass of water, if you can't bring them a hot cup of tea or coffee. It makes no sense. That's un-American. That was simply poking a finger and picking a fight, not solving a problem. I think the way they dismantled the state election board, took the Secretary of State's position out of there, out of the chair's role. I mean, there's a number of things that they didn't do well in that in those times. And like I said, if you really care about improving our election laws in Georgia, you ought to do it in bipartisan ways.
It's so good to hear you be able to put this narrative out. That's why I'm asking the questions, because I didn't know a lot of what you just shared, but it's so important because sometimes people paint with a very, very broad brush. Let me ask you this question. If you had to redo some of the things that you may have voted for in the past, do you have anything that you would do differently in terms of being in the state legislature and serving as lieutenant governor? Would you do anything differently? I
do. One of the big hard issues for me is the abortion bill. And my mistake was that I thought that room full of legislators knew better than millions of women do. And my faith has allowed me to take the time to understand some of these incredibly difficult medical situations that show up in women's lives.
Yeah.
These very difficult personal situations that I will never understand the granular detail of. And so as governor, day one, I will sign an executive order that clarifies doctors can practice medicine without fear of prosecution, which has created a significant problem.
Yeah.
And also introduce legislation to repeal the 6-week ban. None of us wake up with the inherent right to force our own personal opinions on somebody else. None of us have the same exact personal opinions on abortion. We should all be able to be able to make our decisions with our faith, with our family, with our doctors, and with ourselves. And as governor, I certainly would reverse the order.
I appreciate you saying that. I think one of the things that's so difficult is, when a person, a politician, or just a regular human being says that a woman has the right to make decisions for her body, that's not necessarily being pro-abortion. And I think the right has done an amazing job in labeling, you guys are baby killers, you guys are this. And so with this propaganda, they have really, really created a lot of angst, even within Christian communities, that they don't realize. For me, and I think I kind of hear you saying that I know something about your faith trajectory, but there's a difference for me in this is my personal theology, and this is public policy. Mm-hmm. And what's happening now, we talk about Christian nationalism and the rise of white supremacist ideologies and what is happening. Faith informed the slave trades. Faith informed the subjugation of women. Faith informed separate but equal. And, a while ago they had this guy speaking at the White House, invited by a Secretary of Defense who really believes that women have no right to vote and that it should be for the family. And that's from a faith-based perspective. So to hear you talk about that, and because it's been a struggle I've had, here is my personal theology, but here's public policy. And when we really believe in American democracy and the Constitution, as much as we want to believe that America is a Christian nation, America affords all of its citizens the right to have freedom of religion or freedom from religion. And so trying to navigate, here is my personal theology. Here, I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman from a Judeo-Christian perspective. But how do I reconcile that within this whole process of public policy? And I think that's a real challenge that a lot of us are having to deal with, because the right has done an amazing job in saying this is the party of Jesus. Trump has taken the Lord back to the White House, and we are pro-life. And, we want a child to live within the womb. Now, we don't care about if they get raped once they come out of the room. And so a lot of these things are happening. And for me to have conversations with you, to be able to kind of navigate, here is my theology, here's policy. And how do you separate that for the Georgians who are not Christians, for the Georgians who are atheists? How do we maintain our faith but still realize that just because it's my theology? Because the reality is, most people in theology, there are 30,000 different Christian denominations.
I think we that are driven by our faith have to be careful not to use our faith as the weapon of destruction.
That's so good.
It's got to be the tool of healing.
That is so good.
And when you're called to be a Jesus follower, you're not called to just follow Christians. You're called to be an example to everybody, and open-minded and open-hearted. And that's the calling. And there's no better place to put that on display than as governor. And I think there's so many opportunities for us to go from good to great in Georgia.
Yes.
There's so many opportunities. I mean, like, I watch the outright racist attacks by Donald Trump on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Call it what it is. And it's a disgusting period of time in this country. As governor, you get to start to build in policies and procedures that become a diverse and equitable and inclusive government, state government, where you build the model for others to follow. The most impactful leaders in my life have been leaders that lead by example. Yeah. And as governor, that's the type of example I want to lead. It's heartbreaking to watch people use the name of Jesus to tear somebody down.
My goodness.
That's not the faith that keeps me sustained every day. The big turning point for me was the hate crimes legislation.
When I spoke to Ahmaud Arbery's mom on the phone, and she was brokenhearted after, obviously, she saw her son murdered on social media.
Yeah.
And I wanted to pass the hate crimes legislation. So I asked the Republicans to pass it. And they're like, no, that opens up a Pandora's box. There's unintended consequences. Like, what do you talk, like nobody in the right mind could be against passing hate crimes legislation. Like, hate is hate. And so I walked into the Democratic caucus meeting. I said, guess what? We're going to pass a bill together. And I built a whole bunch of great relationships. I wrote about it in the AJC. I had an op-ed this past week with Calvin Smyrie. He helped me pass. Wow. It was amazing.
It's amazing to hear you say that. A while ago, Governor Wes Moore was uninvited to attend the Governors Association meeting at the White House. I chuckled and I said, well, if you were governor, you probably wouldn't receive an invitation either. So how do you feel? What do you say to those who listen to this conversation? What does Geoff Duncan, as governor of Georgia, mean to Georgians and mean to this country? What do we get if and when you become governor of this state?
What you'll get is a governor that focuses on 11 million Georgians and shows up every day to work knowing that the burden is on me to help solve so many other people's problems. And I think if we need to take the state government and angle it towards more Georgians, right? There's folks really, really hurting. My campaign is focused on the three things: the affordability crisis, the healthcare crisis, and the Donald Trump crisis. Now, the reality is an overwhelming majority of Georgians are worried about that. Even Republicans are worried about those same three things. But the affordability crisis is real. I mean, just imagine waking up as a parent not being able to afford rent that's due tomorrow, or not being able to pay for the full batch of groceries that you got sitting on the checkout line, or not being able to afford childcare to go to your full-time job. There's things that you can do as governor. You can better fund the CAPS program. You can better fund the TANF program. You can expand Medicaid. There's things that you can do, but you got to be willing to show up to work every day focusing on not on your political future in a partisan lens.
Wow.
And, I often remind folks when you're elected governor, you represent even the people that didn't vote for you. And that's a burden that's a healthy burden for us to take on.
What I appreciate about you is you're a principled person. You are a person, and I've been watching your journey, and my take is this toxic, divisive, vitriolic context that has now infected politics. You don't represent that. You represent a time and an era, John McCain running for President Obama and people, saying all types of negative and dehumanizing things about him, and John McCain takes the microphone and says, no. You remind me of the era of Thomas Tip O'Neill when these guys would reach across the table and shake hands. It's a time when the political landscape was one about civility and decency and moral courage, even if we didn't agree. And that's what is so incredibly refreshing, and why I appreciate just your conversation and who you are. Politics aside, you exude nonpartisanship, and you exude dignity. And
the shelf life of picking fights has expired. It is time to start showing up to work and solving problems.
Yeah.
And if that means asking folks on the other side of the aisle for their input and consensus, I think one of the biggest eye-openers for me when I first got elected in 2013, and it was in the State House, was I wanted to pass this big rural hospital tax credit bill. And all the Democrats were going to vote against it. And I walked up to Stacey Abrams, who was the minority leader, and I was a little bit nervous because I was new to the room, and she was playing chess and everybody else was playing checkers. Right?
Yeah.
She was really, really smart.
Yeah.
And I said, Leader Abrams, I'd like to get your support on this. And she said, well, we're going to vote no. I said, well, even if you vote no, can you give me a few ideas to improve the bill? And she was gracious enough. She gave me 3 incredibly good ideas. And I put them in the bill, and we worked together. Fast forward a bunch of years, we've raised over $500 million for 54 rural hospitals.
Wow.
And the Democrats voted yes on the bill.
Wow.
That was a big learning lesson to me.
Wow.
Like, you can do this the right way. You
Wow.
can build consensus. You
Wow.
can turn chaos into conversations in a way that changes people's lives.
Wow. I want to give you an opportunity. I want to ask you one more question and give you an opportunity to say whatever you want to say to those who are listening. For those who may have skepticism, okay, this guy was a Republican, and now he's a Democrat. What would you say to those who may have some anxiety, some sense of cynicism or suspicion? What would you say to that person who's skeptical about that transition?
The question I get asked the most is, Geoff, why are you running for governor as a Democrat? And my answer is not because I lost my mind, but it's because I found my heart.
My God.
This truly is a faith journey for me.
Wow.
and our entire family. And, it would have been easier to just stay on as a Republican lieutenant governor and act like I like Donald Trump and say all the right things in all the right moments. That would be surely an easier path to becoming the next governor of Georgia.
Wow.
But that didn't sit well with my soul. It didn't treat people the way I felt like I was called to treat people. And so I wake up to a dose of some political courage to say I was wrong on some issues. I wake up to some political courage to work across bipartisan lines. And I show up here ready to serve the needs of Georgians with this great toolkit as a proud Democrat now. Is it a perfect fit? No. Politics isn't a perfect fit for anybody.
Absolutely.
But it's a much better fit and makes me more prepared to lead Georgia in a better direction. So we can expand Medicaid and get those people the health insurance that they so desperately need. We can pass common sense gun legislation to keep our neighborhoods safe. We can look at affordability issues in a real meaningful way, not just talk about it on the campaign trail and then show up and create tariffs and all the other crazy things that the other side's doing. I want to lead Georgia because I think our best days are still in front of us, and I want all Georgians to see those better days. And I think there's something else going on here too. Our campaign in the first, call it 4 months, had over 11,000 contributions that showed up on our website from all 50 states.
Wow.
And it's not because I'm running national television ads. I can assure you we don't have that much money.
Wow.
But it's because the rest of the country's paying attention to Georgia. And if we get this right in Georgia, then they can get it right in their states. If we don't get this right in Georgia, and Donald Trump becomes the default governor because that's who ends up winning this election, then they can't get it right either. There's a lot on the line here. And this is a faith journey. This is a change of heart, and I cannot wait to wake up as the governor of Georgia to meet 11 million Georgians in their toughest times.
It's so important, and this is, I appreciate this conversation. I hope the others are listening because there's been so much cast your vote so Donald Trump doesn't win. And that's been the motivating factor behind so many candidates and candidacies. But to hear you just say that's a significant motivating factor, but there's a platform, there's substance behind this. And so, because I think it's so important that it's one thing to vote no to Trump, but what you're saying is I'm voting, not just vote no to Trump, but say yes to Geoff Duncan.
Right. I mean, look, there's a lot of issues for us to solve, right? Our public education is not very good in this state, the outcomes. Our infant and maternal mortality rates are not very good right now. We need to do a better job protecting natural resources. We need a better job of public safety in neighborhoods all across the state. We need to make sure we drive economic development. All of that's important. I'm sure everybody listening knows that stuff's important. But a second place trophy isn't going to solve any of those. I think folks are coming my way because I am a more moderate-minded individual. I like to build consensus. But also, I've got the best chance to win this race. It takes more than the base to win to win the governorship. You got to win the base plus the middle. And we've even got this batch of disgusted Republicans that are tired of making excuses for Donald Trump, and they're ready to change parties. We got to open the tent up and let them in.
Well, you know, I don't have any ultimate power to determine the outcome in May or November, but I want to say, you know, with my whole chest, as my son says, I want to thank you for being principled. Thank you for the dignity. Our children are watching what's happening in Washington. Our children are watching what's happening on Instagram and Truth Social. Our children are watching what happens on Fox News. And I want to thank you for not being an embarrassment, to show civility, to show mutual respect. And I just want to thank you for coming on today and sharing your thoughts and your perspectives and answering some questions that may have made you uncomfortable, but being principled and being truthful and being honest.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and even if somebody doesn't vote for me, I tell them they'll still be proud of me. I'm going to go to work every day and put a message that's honest and truthful forward. I think this is the right time in Georgia for that to be the case.
Well, fam, if you're living in Georgia, if you live in another state, you've heard today from our former Lieutenant Governor, Geoff Duncan, who's a present gubernatorial candidate for the governor of Georgia, and you've heard his platform, you've heard his story, and I want to thank you for tuning in to No Amen Required. And if you want to get more information about his platform, please, the information is on the screen, you can go to his website and get more information about his appearances, etc. It's important. We're in desperate times, and we have to be prophetic. We have to be civically engaged and politically inclined. I know this is said often, but I really believe that the future of our nation depends on what happens this November. Make sure that Georgia is on everybody's mind, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but across the world. What happens in Georgia is going to be indicative, I believe, of what's going to happen in 2028. So thank you so much for tuning in to No Amen Required. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you, and Godspeed. And hey, go Rambling Rick.
There we go. Go Jackets.
Yeah. Hey, God bless you, and may you continue to be peaceful. Remember, love justice. Love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly before our God. You've been watching No Amen Required. Until next time, take care.